Thank you everyone for coming out today. Hope everyone's having a good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on a Monday tonight for a conversation that's urgent, inspiring, and unlike any we've hosted before. At Saving Nature, our mission is to reconnect the wild, restore fragmented ecosystems, and create wildlife corridors in some of the world's most threatened regions, including Sumatra, where our work includes protecting some of the last strongholds of endangered songbirds. Our work is rooted in science and driven by partnerships with extraordinary people. Tonight's guest is one of them. Dr. Ben Mirin is an ethnobiologist, conservation scientist, and National Geographic explorer. He's known around the world for his field work, his storytelling, and his creative approach to engaging communities in the fight to protect biodiversity. As you can see, Ben dedicates his life to many different endeavors. However, his main work, which we will discuss today in depth, explores the global trade in songbirds and what it means for conservation, culture, and soundscapes under threat. Tonight, we'll talk about Ben's journey across continents and disciplines, as well as how his work connects to our project in Sumatra. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ben Mirin. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here. I was thinking let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us how your interest in birds and sound first came about? What led you down this path as both a scientist and a storyteller?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm impressed by the deep dive you've done to find all this photographic evidence, Andy. It's impressive.
Thank you.
That shot of me in Alaska is from like 3 weeks ago. So well done. Um,
Thank you.
I yeah, these passions chose me. I was about 3 years old, and my grandmother showed me a book on penguins. Well, my mother and my grandmother, and I could barely read it, but all 18 species were in there. And I often open a lot of my talks with video evidence of my own, showcasing a home movie where I'm basically imitating penguin sounds to my grandmother. So these, I can't tell you why I love birds in particular, but I can tell you what I love about them for hours and hours because it's just been a lifelong journey for me. Same with music. So um, yeah, I think the easiest way to summarize it without taking the whole hour on just this one question is to say that I started birding when I was 3, playing music when I was 7 or 8 years old, and for the longest time, those two passions occupied separate tracks in my life, parallel but separate. And I graduated with a degree in journalism, went out into the world and started traveling. And I noticed that two things always stayed the same about me. I would play music and watch birds everywhere I went. And at that stage of my life, I said, this is an important moment to decide if I'm going to be able to bring together these two pieces of myself. And so I started exploring how storytelling could be the glue between those two worlds. And the funniest thing happened. I was writing about birds at night while working my day job, and then I started making music from bird songs to reconnect with the birds of my backyard. I was living in New York City. I couldn't really hear their songs outside my window. So I had all these instruments, these digital instruments lying around my apartment. I started downloading and sampling birdsong, listening to pieces of audio, cutting out these moments that were interesting, putting them on a keyboard, and just playing them while, doing different beats. And I shared a couple of those videos, and National Geographic got in touch. And we ended up making a children's television show called Wild Beats. You can watch the episodes on my website, benmirin.com. It's under the motion and media tab. And It's like nerdy rock and roll. I was just expressing knowledge that I didn't even know I had ready to share, but playing this music and giving people who are outside of a traditional audience a chance to listen to natural history sounds and ask questions was a really valuable experience. So from there, I went into filmmaking and television production. The more I went out in the field, the more I fell in love with just the scientific process and the experience of discovery. So that's why I went and got a PhD.
The way you approach conservation from an outside the box lens, I think really defines your career so far
Yeah.
from what I've researched. You're not someone that is going to go look at a project and think, okay, what is everyone else doing? I think it's really reflexive And the fact that you got started by recreating sounds and that's how you got discovered. If anyone has a moment, go to Ben's website and check out Wild Beats. It's awesome. I enjoyed it and it was a delightful afternoon listening to the
Thanks.
website. This brings me to something that I'm passionate about, and I know you're especially passionate about. You've done extensive work on the global songbird trade. Can you walk us through the central question behind that work? What have you discovered,
Yeah.
and why does it matter more now than ever?
Well, I think the people in this audience tonight can understand just the innate beauty of a bird song, right? I mean, there are three charismatic species with beautiful songs right here. But and these are North American species, so probably more familiar to most of you here. I work in Southeast Asia, but the songs are beautiful over there too. And in both cases, I think we can speak to the intrinsic value of nature. But when I learned about the songbird trade for the first time, I was blown away because I never imagined that something that gave me so much artistic inspiration and so much intellectual curiosity could have a price tag. But it does. There is a massive industry in Southeast Asia and really around the world, but especially in countries like Indonesia, where I do a lot of my work. Um, the trade in songbirds alone there is valued at about $1.2 billion dollars. And people are harvesting these birds specifically for their songs in nature, not killing them, keeping them alive, and moving them through this big ecosystem of different people who buy the birds, train the birds, feed the birds special diets, and then debut them in these singing competitions. Where they can fill entire, a whole park will be taken over by one of these pavilions with just thousands of people cheering for birds in cages, singing their hearts out while human judges rate their performances. And um, I was just astounded. But I also knew that coming into this, the last thing I wanted to do was start judging these people and criticizing this practice. A lot of people in our world do incredible research and incredible storytelling. But sometimes, especially if you're telling these stories from the outside, you don't get the nuance and the cultural sensitivity that you need to really foster compromise on an issue like this. And I think we can all agree that the best conservation comes from a seed that is planted in common ground. And I wanted to start with the love of birdsong and ask people who expressed the same passion in a very different way, what does this mean to you? And is there a way that we can find compromise between our ways of expressing this passion so that we have both wild birds and a preservation of your cultural traditions so they don't harm each other, they can coexist.
Well said about conservation needs to have common ground. That's p completely logical, and I think something that we need more of. I think it's a very divisive issue, conservation, but really the only way to solve it is to get together and work it out with people that you might even disagree with. I think
Mhm.
when I t started talking to you about the songbird trade a couple months ago with our executive director, Aaron Wilgan, I was blown away by this. I didn't think that there was any sort of songbird trade, songbird singing competitions, all these things that you were telling me about that are terrible, tragic things going on. It's so important that you're here. Everyone on the call gets to hear about it. Just curious if people want, they could tell me if they knew about this songbird trade before hearing Ben just mention it right now in the chat. Or if you have any
I'd be interested.
questions, please please type in the chat. Ben's happy to answer them and I'll make sure they get asked. But yeah,
Thank
just let
you.
us know because it was new to me when I heard about it and the scale of it is so scary. I mean, we get our songbirds here in North America and a lot of them are safe for the most part. And you just don't think about stuff like this happening around the world. So just kudos to you, Ben, on protecting these sounds and saving them so generations ahead could hear them. Much of your work actually emphasizes inclusion and conservation. Can you
Mhm.
talk about how community voices, especially in the places you visit, inform your science and storytelling?
Yeah, I'll start by um, rephrasing something because I am involved in protecting these songs, but I am not the only person by a long shot. I work with a large network of incredible collaborators, both in the storytelling and research worlds. We work across multiple regions, um, not just in Southeast Asia, but increasingly in the Americas as well. This songbird trade is not limited to just far off lands. It is right here in our backyard. Um, and in any case, you need to work with communities who I think can change the game. You've learned a little bit about how I got into conservation as a closeted birder with imposter syndrome, using music to express a hidden love for the natural world. And then that became a bridge to me becoming a National Geographic explorer, getting my PhD at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, all these things that have made up for a really interesting career. Um, but art is what opened the door. And I think authenticity opened the door. And all of us are the sum of all of our parts. I don't think it's really necessary to choose just one thing in life that you do. And sometimes people have their own formula for that, where they have a day job and then a hobby. I took my hobbies and made them my job, for better or for worse. If anyone has suggestions for hobbies, I'm very interested. um, so, finding a way to join conservation, I think, is so important these days because these issues affect all of us. And oftentimes, the people on the front lines of these existential challenges, biodiversity loss, climate change, everything in between, their voices are not represented in the halls of power in the ways that they need to be. And things like art, music, storytelling, they build a bridge for including those voices and diversifying the types of people who are sitting at the table. And at a time when we need all hands on deck, wasting talent is not an option. So we have to bring these folks in on their terms. And it's not about us descending in and finding them and elevating them with all of our, it's giving them a chance to share their power because they have a lot of solutions. So rather than parachuting in, I think we just need to listen and amplify. And so being a sound recordist gives me a way to do that for human and non-human beings alike.
I, I completely agree. I think something that's fascinating that I didn't even realize in conservation when I started is how these things that may appear to me as a layman as not making sense in conservation make sense to do effective conservation. I'll do an example in California
Mm,
because I'm in LA and we just had the
yeah.
fires. They
Mhm.
banned controlled burns
Mm,
as they saw Native Americans were doing it for quite some time. But, laymen like me looked at them burning the side of a mountain and thought, okay, if we stop that, then there'll be less fires. And then California proceeded to have one of the worst wildfire seasons in our history. So,
mm.
it's important to hear everyone's voice and understand, their perspective. And I couldn't agree more on that. I'd like to just out of curiosity, and I'm sure everyone here wants to know, you travel the world uh, to record the calls of birds that may soon disappear, which, is a sentence that sounds like probably the coolest sentence I've said in quite some time. Um, what's it like to do that work in the field? Can you describe a moment that stayed with you?
Well, the photograph you're looking at captures my absolute favorite thing to do. I'm using a parabolic reflector to introduce, and I don't remember this student's name because this was about 10 years ago and it was a group of 30 children. And so they just got a very quick, quick snap. Um, I wish I could give him the shout out he deserves. But we're both listening through an earpiece in a split headset that allows us to train that microphone on a bird. And when you focus a parabolic reflector, you're using actually repurposed military technology, things that were designed for espionage to spy on a bird instead. But when you hear a bird song through a microphone system like this, it sounds like it's sitting on your shoulder. The song shimmers in your ears, and you're listening to a vibration of stardust because sound needs a medium to travel, either through the air, the water, or through the soil and rock and trees. And all of these elements have been broken down from their celestial origins and reformed into these media that convey sound. And they have an ancient legacy. And at the same time, the sound that you're hearing is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So sound is both ephemeral and permanent, shaking the earth, shaking the atmosphere, so you can experience the power of this voice. And being able to hear that voice and capture it with no casualties, with no cages, you can just take away that sound and share it with people. And the conservation potential for it is enormous. So my PhD explored that in the context of birdsong as a commodity because that was a new use for it that I had never encountered before. And I am now on a mission to explore the transformative power of wild birdsong and share the moment you're looking at with as many people as possible.
It's it's profound to hear that. First of all, we got to say Ben's probably the best descriptor of a moment I've ever heard. And this is the second time hearing you talk about this and your passion for this. Everyone needs to hear this. You're very it's very motivating to hear the way you talk about sound and how it affects you. And I know you talked about how you didn't have a traditional start. And, when I hear how your brain works, it just makes me want to learn more and hear more about kind of it. We have a comment that says, I love how Ben said vibrational stardust. So, yeah,
Well, Andy, you and I are alike in that way. I'm hooked, and I'm glad you're hooked too, because
great.
this is a life journey.
Great. And I just I talking to you, I didn't realize how many songbirds were in our Sumatra project. Can
Mhm,
you talk about the songbirds of Indonesia and specifically Sumatra and the
mhm.
effect that and just how conserving that space is important to you? Because we do our work, obviously, one of our corridors is in Sumatra in the Lucer ecosystem. And I'd just love to
Right.
hear kind of what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. I will say that I haven't been to this ecosystem yet, and so I don't want to hypothesize too much. I think I'll be able to say much more when we're together in the field, and I've seen the work firsthand. We're still in the early stages of figuring out how we might collaborate, but um, I mean, habitat is incredibly important, and whether it's deforestation or climate change or biodiversity loss, if these birds disappear, the forest has trouble sustaining itself because they're pollinators, seed dispersers, they're gardeners of the forest, along with many other species in the looser ecosystem. And if you're rebuilding the home they need, that's a critical piece of the puzzle. So I look forward to learning more about what this corridor looks like, how your teams work on the ground, and it'd be exciting if we can incorporate bioacoustics into the work. I describe the active recording methods that are my favorite thing to do, but we also have passive acoustics that we've implemented from my former lab and from my colleagues around the world. And sound gives us a chance to listen to the heartbeat of the earth. And it beats pretty loud in Sumatra. So I think it's important that um, we all try to tune into nature in this special part of the world.
Well said. We have someone in the chat that asked something I was a little shy to ask you, but
I,
they
I saw
said,
the question. So I never can do it on the spot. I do it constantly. And if we hung out in person, you'd hear this all day. Can you hear that?
it
Is that
sounds,
coming through?
no, it's not actually.
That's a shame
Okay.
because Zoom, so for those of you who are not audiophiles, Zoom has a background audio filter. We don't need to worry about it, but it prefers human voices. And for a wildlife DJ like myself performing live animal music on Zoom, it filters it out. It's like that's background. And I'm like, no, that's the main show. So I'll just say, aside from my impressions, which I guess Zoom is ruling out as background noise, um, the songs that we have collected so far, we're on a mission to get a lot of these birds recorded. Um, and it's something that started during my PhD. Um, we can't publicize these songs the way we want to because unfortunately, if they're shared freely on the internet, people download them and use them to catch wild birds. So if you may have seen, um, if you're a birder and you go out in any part of the world where there's a bird watching community, you may sometimes see people with either a phone or a Bluetooth speaker playing the sound. Um, and that draws a lot of birds in. It fools them into thinking that a competitor is in their territory and they get very upset. And that has a lot of energetic costs on these birds, and I prefer not to do it. Sometimes it's hard to avoid, but outside of using it in a scientific experiment, I try to avoid doing that, and I encourage birders to maybe learn how to pish instead, do the psh, psh, psh. If you can use your voice, I think it's a little bit more of a gray zone. But if you're really just playing the sound back, the bird can get quite stressed. And I during my PhD, I followed several hunters. Um, my students and I shadowed them to witness their methods in action. And all the birds were released per a previous agreement before beginning the excursion, but they are ruthlessly efficient at catching these birds. It's pretty decent money, and all they have to do is play a song and set a trap, um, and the birds come in from everywhere. And as a result, a lot of the forests I walked through in Indonesia were eerily silent, and the easiest place to hear a bird song was not in the trees, but in a cage. And so that's what inspired me to begin hunting down these songs and just capturing them for scientific research. I will say one thing we're hoping to do is be able to share them through music, the way I've done in the past, but not just through my music, through the work of my colleagues in the arts and in the performing arts, because it's a little harder to fool the bird if there's a beat underneath the song. But
Wow.
we got to be careful. We're going to have to work with our team to make sure that when we're sharing the songs through our media, that it's not risking their safety.
So what would it look like? A song that wouldn't be affecting the birds and wouldn't be helping the hunters with the beats. Has there been songs that have been made that have been mainstream successes, and what would that look like to you? I'm just curious.
I mean, to be honest, I don't know because this is the magic of transferring an idea into the hands of someone else, into the mind of another creative person. Um, I would have to make my own piece of music to tell you what it feels like because I always let the bird lead. I let the animal lead. I've worked with orangutans before, like the one in this photo. Um, and when you give nature the the spotlight that it deserves, you're more of a messenger, and you sort of you surrender to the key of the forest, and you let it guide you. And what comes out the other side isn't always good, but that's the key to being an artist, is just making this stuff. And I think Ed Sheeran once said, you want to turn that faucet on, and sometimes dirty water comes out, and then clean water comes after. You just have to keep being a vessel for the inspiration that these bird songs provide. So I don't know what it would sound like.
I remember hearing about this movement to copyright. I don't know if you know about this, but if you did, please let me know. They
Hmm.
copyright like jungle sounds so they could put it into into like popular songs that use special effects. And
Okay.
so these copyrights go directly towards organizations and charities. So when a popular artist samples an animal sound or a jungle, the forest gets paid or the jungle gets paid. And
Yes. I work with some of those folks.
okay,
And
great.
I can't reveal all of our plans right now. But we're organizing a major expedition to record the songs of these traded birds, and musicians are part of that plan. And part of our mission is to celebrate birdsong without a cage. And music is a very powerful tool for that. And some of the work that these folks are doing, I'm trying to learn more about it, the nuts and bolts, because I'm a scientist. I want to know how it all works. Um, and I'm still learning a lot from them. But I love the idea. And I'm excited to put that idea into action in this context.
And we have a question. Before we get to the Merlin question, I have a question regarding that. So you
Yeah,
mentioned playing bird calls to entice birds to come out and play. I know that
yeah.
I use eBird and sometimes I'll click and play a bird call and the bird will come out and I want to make sure I'm doing the best, most respectful way of bird watching. Would you say
Mhm.
that's generally not an acceptable way to do it, or what are your thoughts on that?
Uh, it's tough. I mean, I understand where you're coming from in describing what you're trying to do. I'm getting the sense that you're trying to learn what it is, and your intention is to observe and not harass. In practice, I'd recommend doing some of that homework beforehand. When I go on an expedition to a new place, I have my work cut out for me before the field work even begins. I'm pretty good at identifying birds by ear in the places where I work regularly, but sometimes I go to places like Madagascar, the Philippines, Central and South America. Um, and I have colleagues who are wizards at the sounds of those birds, but I don't know them. And so I will uh, usually like Zeno Canto or the Macaulay Library are good resources for just listening to those songs. And Zeno Canto actually lets you download them. Um, be respectful, of course, of their data, but if you're just downloading the tracks from the library, you can drill them in your head like vocab words on flashcards. Um, and then you can go into the field a little bit more prepared.
Yeah, it's cool to hear your thoughts on how to effectively bird watch from an
Sure, yeah.
expert. Patterson wants to know, do you collaborate with Merlin at Cornell?
Some of my recordings in the past have been used for things like Merlin. Um, we don't always see how our contributions to Macaulay Library get used, um, but you saw me working with that parabola, and the Merlin algorithm needs training data, particularly from new places in the world. The Americas are pretty thoroughly covered at this point. Europe has a lot of good coverage, and so that improves the accuracy of the artificial intelligence model that they use. Um, and the same thing is true for BirdNet, which is a scientific version of Merlin that's open source and programmed by scientists to detect sounds not just in the bird world, but across all different types of taxonomic groups. We train detectors to listen to frogs, insects, whales. It's um, it's a really cool way to contribute your field recordings to actually then build out a tool like Merlin or BirdNet that can detect these songs and not just give you a wonderful and enhanced birding or naturalist experience. I love that about Merlin, the gamification of the spectrogram as it plays in real time. That's a really clever design. Um, and I love the malleability of BirdNet to listen to all kinds of things. Um, but yeah, you can actually train these models, and there are people who use these detectors not just for the entertainment value of bird watching, let's say, but to actually sift through mountains of digital mountains of acoustic data and detect these species in landscapes where maybe they haven't been seen in a while, and maybe they might be extinct, but picking up on the presence of a rare bird, let's say, is a great argument for conservation policy because you suddenly have evidence that that bird's still there. And so you can start to publish that research and present it as policy and for policy. And so these are just a couple examples of the ripple effects that sound has um, once you capture it.
Ian, I'm going to get to your question because that's a great question. I want to ask Ben that. But while we're on the subject of technology, I wanted to
Oh yeah.
ask you, well, we got you here. How has technology changed the way we study and protect birds? I know we talked about it a little bit, but from bioacoustics to satellite tracking, what tools are making the biggest difference in your work right now?
Well, bioacoustics is a great burgeoning new field. And when I say new, I mean maybe I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I think it's like 50 to 60 years old. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's not as it doesn't have as long a tradition as some of the other fields in biology. But boy, is it affordable and effective. Um, listening to these landscapes either through the technology you're seeing me use, active recording methods where you're there in the field. That's what I live for. But you can also program microphones to listen for a few months at a time, and it will be basically like sampling the soundscape for you at consistent intervals, and you can come back and look at those data and learn all kinds of things about an ecosystem that maybe sings even louder when you're not there. So when you pull open those files, it's like Christmas morning. You're looking at this, you're opening this treasure chest with all these sounds in it, and you get to listen to the world. What the world sounds like when you're not around. So recording technology is obviously a big one. I do have to give a shout out to the music technology that I use. I think it's important to remember that we're trying to democratize science and conservation in a way that welcomes people from all backgrounds. And technology is just one of those bridges that people can cross. Um, and I mentioned artificial intelligence and monitoring landscapes and training tools like Merlin and BirdNet. Um, but I mean, I don't have any to show you on this call, but so one of my teams and I are working on uh, a series called Voice Gems that turns audio data into bespoke digital objects that can be 3D printed as sculptures. And the idea is AI turns sound into a physical form. And to me, it's not just beautiful, it's another door being opened. So technology is a crowbar to the door that should never be closed. And the more people we just get into this party, the more fun we're going to have, and the better job we're going to doing of taking care of this planet.
What would a physical form of sound look like? I'm curious.
You'll have to go to my Instagram to see some examples.
Okay.
It's better just looked at than described, but it's at Ben Mirin.
Okay.
Um,
Everyone go check
and
that out.
yeah, but we've got a few examples there, and we're figuring out what to do with the majority of them, because they're going to be recordings of these songbirds. And once we find a safe way to share those, please stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. You'll have to let me know when that happens. So
Yeah,
Ian
we'll
wants to
do.
know,
Hmm.
what has listening to birdsong taught you about listening to humans and attunement to the earth and or language learning?
Oh, um, I can't speak as much into the language learning process. Well, I can a little bit. Um, these bird songs, there are some studies that equate them to language, and I'm not a linguist, so I don't want to use the wrong terminology, but um, I do know that a lot of songbirds learn how to sing early in life from their adult parents and neighbors, and over time, especially in island ecosystems, um, the selective forces of both the environment and the birds themselves create these little pockets with unique songs, and they develop accents, regional accents that give biodiversity a voice. And in some of these landscapes, if you just go, a short distance to the next island over, let's say some of the islands off the coast of Sumatra are a great example of this. The birds will be different species and they will sound different, even if they look the same or very similar. You can hear evolution taking its own path, its divergent path in each of these little spaces. And sadly, when you pull these birds out of their ecosystem, especially if they're young, they lose the sounds they need to survive in the wild. They are reprogrammed to sing for our entertainment. And if you just, this is why smashing cages and releasing birds again is not, in addition to it just being very disruptive and confrontational, in a society where confrontation is really it means something very different than it does in the United States. Um, some of these birds, in addition to maybe being too sick to fly, and maybe sick enough that they would introduce pathogens to the environment, um, they may not have the song they need to survive where you release them. And so part of what we're exploring is how to get these wild songs back. If we can find the last few places in the world where these songs were sung in the wild and capture that voice, that gives us something to help birds regain their ability to sing their native songs. Um, so there's a lot of power in bird song learning to be tapped into it as a conservation channel. Because the better they sing like their natural relatives, the better shot they have at survival. Um, you also, what was the other part of the question about just listening to the earth, right? And
Yes.
yeah, um, I mean, I think what I said earlier about sound being both permanent and ephemeral is a useful grounding rod. Um, I grew up early in life with an early in life diagnosis. I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, and had a lot of hangups about that. Um, and things like this technology or just the practice of listening ground me in a way that nothing else does. And it took me 30 years to figure out how to really focus with that, on my own terms. Um, and I guess for me, that lesson, to answer your question, was just a deeply personal one. Birdsong gave me a tether to the earth, and I'm grateful. Um,
That's uh that's super
yeah,
interesting. I've read some studies about ADHD and how it relates to mindfulness and how that could help
yeah,
grow. And it sounds like birdsong in itself is a practice of mindfulness for you to help you
very much
improve your
so.
focus. So it was almost educational.
Yeah, for me and for anyone who's willing to receive it, and because it's changed my life, I want to find safe and ethical ways to share it with the world as an experience, as an example of nature's beauty, and as an example of what's at stake if we don't tune in. And that's where listening to each other, to get up to the last piece of the question, that's where that comes in. Because, like it or not, all of us share the earth with people with whom we disagree. And we are in a very divided time in our society right now. And part of part of rebuilding those relationships is just being able to listen to each other and realize we're not so different. And even if we are, that's okay. We can hold space for both. It's not a zero sum calculation. Um, and that's leading me to some other thoughts about just the power of storytelling. Is it okay if I riff, Andy? I don't want to.
We're loving this and people are
Okay.
really appreciating it. So great.
Okay. I'm just gonna, this is the power and the challenge of having a free associative mind, is just being conscious of what people are waiting for, but also seeing orthogonal connections and ideas. So, I mean, that thought of divisiveness brought me to this idea that, well, it's not an idea; it's well documented. There's an increasing public distrust in science, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, and combating misinformation is a really important piece of that. Trying to operate in a sensitive manner in a divisive time is really important. But I'm both an artist and a scientist and a communicator, storyteller. And to me, the job is not just to get more facts out there. We have to, public trust is something you earn. It is not a given. And we publish a lot of research that's behind paywalls or kept in university libraries. And don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect for the work that's done through that process. But the responsibility kind of falls on us too. We have to humanize the things we're learning about the natural world through things like art and storytelling and conversations like this, because the public deserves to know what they're paying for. Our work is mostly publicly funded. And I hope that even just tonight, but in all the work that all of us are doing beyond, I can add to that collective effort to regain the public's trust and let them know that these issues are for them. They are, we're interested in what they have to say. You don't need a PhD for this stuff to matter to you. You really don't. It's a massive global topic that concerns the very survival of our species and the world as we know it. And nature will endure without us. But if we like being a part of that system, everyone has to get on board. So that's the end of my riff, I guess.
People really resonate with that. And Alita says, wow, that's a powerful response, Ben. feels like similar situation with people losing connection with their cultures, like birds losing their ancestral song.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that, Alita. That is there's a mirror between our taxonomic groups, the loss of song, the loss of culture, the loss of connection and understanding. So thanks for putting it so succinctly, because I've been speaking for several minutes, and she distilled it into a comment. So that's great.
We're all learning a lot from you, and we have a lot of very smart people like you on this call. And Michael Porter wants to know,
Mm-hmm.
he says, I recently learned most female songbird species also sing. My question is, do the female songbirds sing for the same reasons as the male songbirds, or are there some
Oh,
different reasons?
that's a great question, and I would recommend consulting the work of Karen Odom on that one. She's a colleague of mine. We met through the Lab of Ornithology back in the day, and at a few conferences. So I'm not the expert on that topic, but I think something like 63% of female of songbird species have females that sing. And I remember thinking about ways to study that. Um, I feel like I might be grasping at straws if I dig up that part of my memory bank and don't verify it first. But it's a great question. Um, and I think it's really important that we pay attention to both male and female songbirds. There's a lot being said that has escaped our attention so far because we just assumed that only the guys are singing, but it's not true.
Yeah, I love the people that join these calls because it varies from professors to people like me that don't know as much. And you just learn so much. And Ryan wants to know, are there many birds that sing outside of our hearing range, too high or too high pitch or low pitch?
There are some birds that use auditory signals beyond our hearing range. There's an ultrasonic species of hummingbird from South America that, excuse me, has a sound that it makes that goes beyond our hearing range. I would need to check the paper again because it came out a few years ago, um, to verify what they hypothesize is the reason for that evolution. But yes, there are avian signals out there that we cannot hear without special technology.
Interesting. I just that makes me think of Superman. I don't know if you've seen Superman,
Which
but
one?
that like original one where he there was a sound that only he could hear. Yeah.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
Um, while we're on this slide, I also wanted to know just
Hmm.
someone that's watching this today and listening to you that wants to get more into conservation and use technology on their phone to get more into conservation. What kind of apps are accessible to us to be able to
Oh,
use that you would
yeah. I mean, I think the classic ones, the eBird Merlin pipeline is a pretty well trodden path at this point, and the tool is great in many parts of the world. And it's most robust in North America and Europe, just because it has the most training data, because that's where people have generally the most access and or resources to acquire technology, like the kind you see on this slide. Um, and But as those apps grow, I'm hoping to see them cover more of the globe. Um, I would also just, you know, all of that goes into the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but that's not the only destination you have to uh, send all of your media towards or all of your findings. It's a great one, but um, there are lots of free or very affordable recording apps on your phone. This is something that I do, recording workshops. Um, I use there are apps by, there's one called Recorder HQ, one by Rode, I believe. Um, I would just search for recording apps in the App Store. If you have a smartphone, even the voice memo app is enough because the best microphone is the one you have. Uh, and I say it to everybody because you don't have to go spend thousands of dollars on A, plane tickets, and B, gear to get this stuff. If you think about it like a storyteller, there's magic in your backyard right now. And your intimacy with that and familiarity with that environment gives you special access. so that you don't need to cavort around the world to get the most compelling things. Sometimes it's right in front of you or right over your head. And there are some settings you can use on these apps to record and varying varying sample rates and bit depths and file formats. And they're not these apps are like either free or like $2 or $5, and it gives you a way of just getting more information into that recording. And if you're going to talk specifically about capturing sound, um, I would say take your phone and don't move when you're recording. Even moving it in your hand, will shake the microphone quite a lot. If you can, just set it flat on a surface nearby. Be very quiet. Stand in a place where you can either stand still or there aren't a lot of leaves and twigs around. Because if you don't want to be crunching all over your own recording, right? Try to be on your own or with a group that is respectful of the process and equally motivated, hopefully, to listen and be quiet. Um, and it's amazing what you can get. And sometimes, I mean, I bet there are people in this call who have had plenty of amazing encounters with wildlife and can think back to how they didn't have their camera. And that's why some bird showed up or I've been on safaris too. And when the camera's not working, that's when the leopard just walks across the path and kind of
Right.
looks at you. Um, but what you have on you is sometimes the best thing because it's there to capture those moments. So, um, yeah, I would lean into the technology you have, and if you want to continue the journey, there are a lot of resources out there for how to dive deeper.
I can't wait to get started on that.
Hmm.
I'm gonna put, I'm gonna quote you here. You said that creativity is essential to making science more inclusive. And I know in this call we already talked about inclusivity. What does that look like in practice? And how can we better engage people who don't see themselves reflected in traditional science communication?
I'm really glad you're asking what it looks like practically, because I can sit up here and recite talking points all night, but the rubber needs to meet the road. I'm still at the beginning of this journey, so I'm developing models for how to do this. But uh, during my PhD project, I should really call it our project. It's my PhD, but it's our collective effort. And so we called that project The Price of Beauty, and it's a collection of media gathered by Indonesian students and researchers that I recruited and worked alongside in this team of about 20 people. And we followed the journey of a traded songbird from the forest to the stage, trying to meet people at every step of that journey and understand their perspectives, photograph them, photograph their birds, record sounds of the environment. And we ended up with this archive of material that we've been using um, to publish. Well, we're working on publishing an ethnography, community-led ethnographic storytelling uh, story about this issue from Indonesian perspectives. As you'll remember, I talked about kind of the outside gaze looking in and missing key details. What better way than to pass the microphone, to pass the paintbrush, to shift the spotlight to somebody who works and lives in these areas, especially if you come from a place like Cornell University or a place like the United States. Sharing power is about opening up opportunity and letting people shine. And if you give them the tools, you can be amazed what they do. So, inclusivity in terms of the creative process. Academically, it has to be co-authorship. Um, People need their names where they can be seen. And in my PhD case, my students own their media. These are my data for my PhD purposes, but I license it from them. They retain copyright, and when we publish things together in the mainstream media, they get paid. So this needs to be about more than prestige. You can't eat prestige. You need to be getting people paid not just when they're working for you, but when their media and the work they produced is used subsequently. And when I give talks, we have we took that media and we co-authored a curriculum for the public schools, and we produced a touring photographic exhibition called The Price of Beauty that hosts focus groups for poachers and conservationists and everybody in between, to create that common ground that we talked about before. Their names are on all that work. If it gets commercialized in any way, they get paid for it. And when I give talks about it, I invite that group to join me. Sometimes they've joined me on Zoom, and sometimes they join me on stage. And that has very real and practical implications for a young person's career, particularly in the sciences. If you get to say that you spoke at a fancy school overseas, I know that it's strange. Earlier, I'm thinking about like how we shouldn't always be looking beyond our borders. We should look at home. And that's a really powerful thing. But I do also dwell on how the world is not an equal place. And the United States, for better and for worse, has a lot of cultural clout in the world. And being able to give people from Indonesia or other countries in that region access to its platforms, and a chance to be recognized, that can really make the difference for a person's career. And I love my students. I would do anything for them, and it's just a real privilege for me to know that as a leader, I can cultivate a space where others blossom and watch that happen. Because that was just the peak. That was my peak during my PhD. So that's what it looks like in practice: is sharing credit, sharing resources, sharing opportunities.
I'm getting a sense that you're very humble and very open to just solving the problem, not just taking credit or getting credit, but finding ways to actually solve solutions, like you said previously.
It's kind of you to say, and sure, you can say it's my humility, but let's flip it and talk about productivity culture for a second. All of us are under so much pressure to make stuff. And I got news for you. This process might take a little longer in the beginning, but the rewards are massive. You are working with people on the basis of trust and collaboration. You will go so much further than you will by yourself. It's a waste of time and energy to undercut people in the field and try to just get out ahead. This has to be a tide that lifts all boats. And when you have those relationships, you learn from your colleagues, your students, so to speak, become your teachers. And I mean, that's why we have the momentum we have with this project, is because we took that participatory approach. I could have just gone in and gotten out and written my papers and been done with it. But we have a living, breathing thing on our hands, and that's because it's shared between us. So I hope people listening to this will entertain that participatory co-creative process from all angles. Just know that it's the right thing to do, and it also has greater rewards. So you can't lose if you include people. Um, it's a really special thing.
On that note, how has climate, Ian wants to know how has the climate crisis, deforestation, and development impacted birds and birdsong? And what are some efforts that inspire you that are addressing the roots of that devastation?
Yeah.
Big
Um,
question. So we could maybe
yeah.
answer it in parts.
Well,
Sure.
I'll start the way I think we should always start answers to questions like these, which is, this is not the whole picture. You know, just because I am called doctor doesn't mean I know a lot of things outside of my little space of knowledge that I spent half a decade cultivating. We all have a piece to add to this. So mine will be a small grain of sand. But you can hear climate change. You can hear deforestation. I listen to these ecosystems, and there are times when you can hear trees being cut down. Um, you know, a chainsaw ripping through a chorus of insects and birds as their home is destroyed. Um, Climate change, for example, has a really profound effect on migratory birds, because these birds are using environmental cues to decide when to leave for their wintering or breeding grounds twice a year. And of course, climate change will affect the availability of their food resources along the way. So if they get to these stopover points and, you know, things are out of sync and in one ecosystem they got the cue to leave, but then the flowers bloom too early and the fruiting season of the plants that they depend on it hasn't started yet or has already finished and they're arriving out of sync with that process, they're gonna starve. Um, and it's really difficult to it's difficult and inspiring to see how these systems are so interconnected. And I think one thing that really makes us human is remembering that we are part of that system. We're not here to just protect sacrosanct wilderness in a human-free kind of way. We all have influences, immediate and distant, on these amazing ecosystems. And the closer we can feel to them, I think the more sensitive we will be. Um, Birdsong is a really good way of tracking those things because you're listening to those environments. Um, and so the efforts that inspire me are efforts to document these challenges. I've shared some stories that I've covered, either as a filmmaker or a scientist, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more out there.
And on that note, here's some beautiful songbirds.
Yeah,
We're gonna ask about your
I know these guys.
yeah. Wait, what are the
Yeah.
names of all? Could you know all three of these?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Um,
let's go through them.
but
So,
yellow warbler and blue jay, and I think this is it a veery or a Swainson's thrush? I always get those. Um, Maybe someone in the chat is going to correct me on that one.
I think it was a
Um,
Veery, but I'm not
okay,
positive. But I think that's what I searched, and so
okay.
you're
Um,
pretty talented.
well, you should be some of my friends. Um,
Yeah,
I've
I
I've
found your
never been
story.
as motivated by padding my stats. But some people are just wizards at birdsong, and I started off this conversation with you talking about how we are the sum of all of our parts, and I combine music and birds. Um, Sometimes I still have imposter syndrome. I think we all do because there are people around who just choose one thing and crush it. They're so good, and that's always really impressive. But there's a lot of opportunity in looking at the ecotone between disciplines, the transdisciplinary spaces, because that's where new ideas form. So one way or another, um, you can contribute. And I think that that's one of the things that gives me hope is knowing that the way we combine new ideas generates, we can break down barriers in how we think and how we work and how we act and treat each other. Um, and I've seen that in real time, and I've been able to live it in my own life. So uh, just knowing that I can hopefully use my experience and resources to encourage others down that same pathway is really inspiring because I think it was Bill Nye who said, everyone knows something you don't. And a close friend of mine, also from Cornell, said, everyone has a piece of gold in their pocket, and it's your job to find out what that is. So,
It's well
um,
said.
yeah, being open to that, to the opportunity that transdisciplinary collaboration opens. Um, and I guess the last thing I'll say is just my students give me hope. If we can prioritize that inclusive process, it takes a little bit longer to start, but the rewards are worth it and the impact is lifelong, multi-generational.
Everyone does have a piece of gold on them, and it's our job to get it out. That's a beautiful message. What what I wanted to conclude with is just, first of
Mm.
all, where could people find you and get in touch with you? I know you
Yeah,
have a newsletter.
yeah. Um, you can sign up for my newsletter at benmirin.com. And if you want to support our effort to protect these birds, check out priceofbeauty.org.
Perfect. And we could thank you. People are saying, Angela says, wonderful and warm presentation. Professor Mirin is so engaging. Thank you. And Eliza Hannah says, thank you. Marvelous time spent with you.
Thank you all for joining. Maybe I'll be a professor someday, just a doctor for now. But uh, I really appreciate your company in the digital space. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and Ben, thank you for sharing your work, your insight, and your dedication to conservation with us. I know that this is a lot of people's first time hearing Ben speak, and to me, it's always so inspiring. The first time I was moved to tears, and tonight, some points hearing about the condition of the songbirds and how they're putting cage in these competitions and the work you're doing. It's so inspiring. Uh,
Thank you.
Listening to Ben talk can be one of the most powerful tools we have in the fight against to protect biodiversity, I'd say. To everyone listening tonight, if this conversation moved you, we invite you to take action right now by supporting our project in Sumatra, which is protecting some of the endangered songbirds that Ben is fighting to protect. Your donation will help us protect the forest habitats where some of the world's last remaining songbirds still survive. Together, we could fight this illegal bird trade. You could scan the QR code that's up on the screen, or you could visit savingnature.com and go to Sumatra and press donate to make a donation today. Every gift goes directly towards reforesting critical land and connecting fragmented habitats. Uh, I just want to say before we open this up to questions, this event has been recorded and will be available soon on YouTube and Spotify. Please feel free to share it widely. Ben, thank you again for being here tonight. And to all you tuning in, thank you so much for coming and being a part of this effort to reconnect the wild and to make the world a better place. So I just wanted to thank everyone and open it up to questions. But just thank you everyone for coming out on a Monday night. Let's see.
I see messages of thanks, and I
A lot of
continue to
thanks.
appreciate that. Yeah. Folks, the links, someone requested I put them both in the chat. They're there as well. Um, and who knows, there may be a way to build out a partnership here. Price of Beauty, Saving Nature, a number of the species we're after for our upcoming expedition live in this forest. So whoever you want to get behind, this is a collective effort. So
Yeah,
thank you.
we're all on the same team here. Like you said, collaboration is so important. Everyone has a piece of gold, on them, and it's up to us to discover it. To quote you,
Yeah.
the soon to be, I'm sure, Professor Ben.
We'll see. I'm a student of this career. We'll learn as we go.
We've got, let's see, Beth asked you to drop the link. You have the
Yeah.
link now for both those things. Uh, Robin says, thank you. This was so interesting and such a thought-provoking discussion. Beth says, great talk. Much appreciated. Philip Hughes says, thank you. Fabulous. Thank you, Ben. Thanks, Saving Nature, for this in these efforts. So I just want to thank everyone again. Again, you scan the QR code or go to our website and click Sumatra and press donate and check out all of Ben's stuff. Ben, anything else you'd like to plug?
Um, I think the two links there. I'll just drop my social media in the chat.
Give Ben a
You know,
follow. It's a great account.
yeah.
It's much
Thanks.
more wholesome than other stuff out there. And
Oh,
Ben will
thanks.
tell you all these great things. And if you don't follow Saving Nature, make sure to do that as well. Uh, thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you, Ben, for your time. And we'll email this link out to everyone shortly. And you guys could respond and get in touch or get in touch with Ben through his Instagram, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yep. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ben.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take
Make sure to
care.
tune into nature.
Bye.